So if you're not new to this channel, you should know that we really love talking about comic books around here. And I don't just mean superhero comics, but also indie comics by independent creators with original stories and all that good stuff. And if you haven't really delved much into the more indie side of comics, or maybe you're new to comics in general, this is my little video to show you what I have been reading over the past year, what some of my favorite books have been, and just show you the breadth of originality, artistic talent, creative writing that's out there for you to explore and discover for the first time. And I'm really not going to waste a lot of time with a long preamble on this one because we do have a lot of comics to talk about. So I'm just going to go ahead and start with this series called Low, published by Image Comics. The main creative team behind it is Rick Remender and Greg Ticini, and I think McCaig is also credited in some of the later comics after the first issue. And it's comprised of 6 trade paperbacks like this one. I only have 4 in my hand because I could not find the other 2 in my house, but I have finished the series. It is a complete series, so it has a very satisfying narrative arc. And in terms of the story, it is a post-apocalyptic, underwater sci-fi story that really hits all the buttons in terms of what I love in my sci-fi fantasy universe. It's set in a world where in the far distant future, radiation from the sun has basically made the Earth's surface uninhabitable, so people have been living underwater for basically centuries, if not millennia, and they had sent some probes off to space to search for planets to live on ages ago. But it's been so long, and since the radiation from the surface is slowly trickling down underwater, a lot of the civilizations are already on the brink of collapse, if not they have already collapsed, or if not they've lost all hope and they kind of refuse to think of a possibility where the world does not come crashing down within the next few decades. And one day a probe does send signs of there being some hope out there for a place for them to live. But nobody really wants to go back up to the Earth's surface except for this one woman named Stell Kane. Now, I think she is one of the best protagonists that I have seen, not just in comics, but in a book or in any piece of art in recent years. I think she's really stuck with me as a very original character, a very strong female character. I know that term likes to get thrown around a lot and people like to argue what that actually means, but to me, and what I see in Stell Kane, is that she is a very well-written, well-rounded, complex characters with strengths, weaknesses, and with a clear set of values. I think it's her values that really make her stand out because she stands for hope and optimism in a time of deep, deep darkness. A lot of things happen to her throughout her journey. A lot of things happen to her family. It starts off, it's not really a spoiler because it starts in the beginning of the book. She experiences some tragedy when her husband gets killed and her daughters get kidnapped. And so she's left alone throughout most of this journey. And of course, there are some very interesting reunions as the story unfolds. Her daughter has spent lots of years without her. I can't remember how long it was exactly, but they kind of grew up in these very harsh environments. And when Stell does reunite with them, of course, it's not exactly the happy reunion you'd like it to be, but there is a lot of room for these characters and for her to grow. And when it comes to the art in this comic, I will say that it's absolutely stunning. The inking in particular is just so beautiful and strong to look at, and the colors complement all of these scenes and all of these environments perfectly. A lot of the pages are also colored in these really strong reds and yellows to really show you how that radiation has permeated the whole Earth, and to contrast with the underwater cooler tones. But both of these things clashing together, it really makes for a hostile, toxic environment. It's just very cool, a very original world that this creative team has built, and it is really worth reading, especially if you love sci-fi especially if you love underwater sci-fi or if you just love a great adventure story with a strong protagonist and beautiful art. Alright, so I've done my sales pitch on low. Let me know if you go ahead and pick it up. Let me know if you have read it and what your thoughts are on it. Next, we are going to be talking about Fairyfare Issue 1 by Nick Bryan and Rosie Alexander. So this is a single issue comic, and I believe a sequel, a second issue is in the works right now, but it's not currently out yet. But I fell in love with this one issue so hard that I have been just constantly keeping a lookout as to when the next one will come out. It is an urban fantasy comic with fairies working in the gig economy. So think of them working on an app like Uber or whatever your food delivery rider app is. And these fairies are contracted to grant people wishes from the app. And it tells a story of two sisters. I love a story about siblings, but especially sisters, both of whom are working for this app called Fairyfare. And one of them is doing pretty well. She's rising up the ranks, getting all those 5-star reviews, while the other one has become sort of disillusioned with it, and she had decided to quit, and she's trying to live her life as normally as she can and find a normal job. But at the same time, she starts noticing strange things about the app. And because her sister starts getting into talks with Fairy headquarters about a promotion and kind of actually seeing what goes on behind the scenes in this corporation, the other sister, she starts to become a little bit obsessed with the mystery behind this corporation. She starts to ask, why do fairies need human money anyway if we have magical powers? What really stood out to me when I picked up this comic for the first time is the art style by Rosie Alexander, and not just the way it's drawn, but the way it's colored, from all of the pastel pinks, the bright purples and oranges. It's very cotton candy, actually. It's not pastel. It's like cotton candy colors that make it really seem like you're in this fantastical, magical world. But I also just noticed when I was reading through this for this review, I was rereading it, and the way that they've really meshed the idea of magic and technology, because it deals with the gig economy and the way we use technology as a part of our lives. They've also used the colors to highlight this effect. You get a lot of that kind of digital effect. You know, when you're watching a 3D movie and before you put on your glasses, everything looks like there is a shadow of red, green, and blue. I believe those are the 3 colors. And you get to see that a little bit here in terms of the way those colors are overlaid. I don't know what they're called. I'm just gonna refer to them as like 3D colors, which is super cool and such a nice detail that I didn't pick up on the first time I read it. It's a really vibrant and fun story that has a lot of really incisive commentary about what it's like working in the gig economy, or just what it's like working as a young person in the job market today in general, which is why I would say I feel like a lot of the jokes would make more sense and it would be more funny to adults reading it, even though I think people of all ages could read this comic. It is just very smart that way. I wouldn't call it satire, so to speak, but it does have that like snappy satire element. I can't snap with this hand. I can snap with this hand. But yeah, like I said, it's just a really great read, and the mystery carries on till the end of the comic book and has a little cliffhanger in there as you get to learn more about the Fairyfare headquarters and the boss and the lead fairy who runs the place. And it makes you want to know more about this universe, and I really am looking forward to the second issue coming soon. Okay, so the next thing that I will be talking about is this comic and the zine by Kirby Wonders. I would just put them together as a set, even though they're not. But they're both about the Sad Thing, which is an original character created by Kirby Wonders. And I have a very special place in my heart for this comic because it deals with topics of depression, mental health, and it's really created as almost a mindfulness exercise or a mindfulness book that takes you through the sad thing and the sad thing's journey as it kind of walks around town and learns to sit with its emotions and be okay with itself. And I found it very helpful when I was personally going through a hard time last year. I was struggling with depression for many, many months. And I picked up this comic at Comic-Con. I hauled myself to Comic-Con, even though I was in the trenches of my depression. And I'm so, so glad that I did, because I would not have found this comic. The art style is honestly so calming and relaxing to look at. I think because of the textures that the artist uses. There is a lot of textures that resemble charcoal or like color pencils, and it really gives this tactile experience, which is needed by people who are struggling with depression or people who just need to get out of their head. It helps with anxiety too. I mean, the thing that therapists, doctors, people always say is when you are stuck with some mental health problems, it's always good to do something outside. Go for a walk, do something tactile, use your senses, anything to make you more present in the moment and get out of your body. And I feel like this book was created specifically to do that. Like, even if you see this page of the sad thing at a cemetery and there's all this rain pouring down on the graves, I could actually feel that rain. I could feel how cold it is. But to me at the time and to me now, just feeling things like that, it was so incredible. It was like it was like finally getting out of my own head. And yeah, there's just a beautiful message here about accepting your own grief and learning to sit with it before you can overcome it. Even though it doesn't focus on that, it really just helps give you the environment you need to foster that sense of self-acceptance. And this zine I also picked up is kind of like a companion piece because it's called The Sad Things, Small Smiles, and it's like an activity book, which I really enjoyed. It says, the zine contains some activities to help calm anxiety and the sad thing in you. I hope these help you and bring a small smile, no matter how small it may be. So yeah, it has a couple of prompts, art prompts here. I haven't really filled out much of this, but I did do this painting last year. I haven't finished it, and I feel like I would if I have some spare time at some point. It's just very relaxing. If you like activity books like this, it's so worth picking up, and I always keep these two books near me on a shelf when I can see them, so whenever I do need that type of emotional reassurance, I would honestly just reach for these zines and pick them up, and I would feel at least slightly better about myself. So yeah, thank you, Kirby Wonders. All right, so we're almost done. I have two more things that I wanted to talk about, but before we do, if you're enjoying this video so far, please do give me a like and subscribe to my channel. It would really help me out and it would mean a lot. And I would love to hear from you if you've read any of these books that I've talked about so far. Do you know any of these artists, writers? Or if you haven't, let me know what you are currently reading. I would love to check out some new recommendations from you guys as well. All right, so on to the next comic on my stack. It is Deadliner, self-described as a psychological horror trip by the creators themselves, Dave Cook, Donna A. Black, and Rob Jones. I really love this comic, and I feel like if you are into horror, but especially if you are a writer or you are a creator in some form, you will especially resonate with this comic. It will really hit harder for creatives because it's about a writer struggling with a deadline, but at the same time, he's dealing with the death of his friend, who was also a writer. So he pushes all of those feelings aside and he doesn't really have time to grieve because of how focused, how burnt out, how stressed, and how frustrated he is about not being able to meet his deadline. So he decides to go on this little mountain retreat in a secluded area to focus wholly on his writing and unpack his thoughts from there. And what I will say about this comic is that it's not a very plot-focused story or plot-focused comic. So if you're coming in expecting like a mystery that is going to have answers and such. You're not really going to get that. What you are getting is the experience of being in this guy's mind, in being in a creative's mind when they are trying to make something and when they're dealing with a lot of their anxieties. And because his friend was a writer as well, his death also sparked some reaction on social media. So there's a little bit of commentary in there too about what it means to separate your personal and your public life, your private and public life, when you are a creator. The art style is like this mix of very trippy photorealism, almost, with a lot of watercolors that blend into one another. I actually don't know how people create this art style digitally. I've seen other comics or just like artworks like this, but I've always been very curious as to how they make that effect, that photorealistic but also melted watercolor feel. There's also this feeling in the way the panels and the framing is laid out, that things are being pasted on top of each other, things are being like cut out and ripped apart, and it very much feels like a struggle. The feeling of this story and of this comic is a struggle to create. It's when you want to make something, but it's not coming out the way you want it to. And that is a very horror thing. Even though this comic is heavy with feelings of dread and fear and even that paranoia, the overarching feeling that I got when I walked away from it was actually one of empathy. I was very empathetic towards the writer and his struggles, and I felt bad for him. I think I understood exactly what that feels like, and it made me feel like I shouldn't be so hard on myself because you can see the lengths that he goes to rationalize not mourning his friend, focusing on his deadline, and putting everything in his life aside for the sake of the work, the great creation. Truly, the horrors, I understand. It's the only way I know how to express anything, which is a very nice segue to my final recommendation, which actually isn't even a comic. I'm sorry I baited you, but it's something that is so good that I feel like comic readers would enjoy. It is the Hellebore zine, published in the UK. It's an original zine that focused specifically on British folklore and occult history. So every issue is a collection of essays on a certain topic. As you can see, there's one here on the summoning, there's one here on ancient terrors, there is one here on Yuletide, the Yuletide special. This is my favorite one. And there's one here on unearthing. So like, for example, on this issue on the unearthing, you have this essay on the god of the great deep, and you have these essays on buried traumas and the way films have like covered themes of unearthing and the real life inspiration behind some folkloric or like horror characters. There's a lot here about witches in Britain especially. It's always super interesting, and like I said, very well researched. To me, that stuff is just so interesting, and as you can see, this zine is also like a masterclass in graphic design and in typesetting. Like, look how beautiful these illustrations are. I am absolutely in love by how the layout is done in this scene. I think that made me fall in love with it in the first place. I love all their cover photos as well. I think I follow one of the photographers on Instagram because I'm just so inspired by her style, and I love the entire aesthetic that they've gone for. It's a work of art. That's essentially what I'm saying. So that's the end of my review today. Let me know if any of these caught your interest, and I will definitely be back with more comics reviews in the future. Don't forget to like and subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. Like I said, it would really help me out. And as always, I will see you guys in the next one. Bye!